The journey ends. The first light of dawn spread across Sertal like a layer of golden ash, warming the thick air left behind after the night's devastation. Among the smoking rubble, Darius Hale groaned softly and dragged himself out, the hot sand scraping his face with sharp, stinging bites. A massive boulder had landed just beside him. If it had fallen a few inches closer, his ribs would have been crushed long ago. He staggered to his feet, exhausted but alive. That was the only thing that still mattered. When he turned around, a towering shape was also pushing the stones off its body. Vra'kor rose to his feet with heavy, deliberate strength. His shoulder plate had caved in. A section of his mask was cracked, with a jagged line stretching down to the chin, proof enough that last night's collapse was the kind that would have flattened an ordinary warrior. Yet he still stood tall, as if the weight of Zertal itself could not force him to bow. Darius said nothing. He simply looked at that battered but unbroken frame and understood something simple. In the final moments of chaos, when the tremors brought the entire cavern crashing down, Vra'kor had turned, covering him with his armored body. Not because Darius was an ally, not out of mercy, but because amid the screaming and the blood, two stranded beings had no choice but to rely on each other to survive. Vra'kor gave him a small, hard nod, sharp as steel, before picking up his broken spear. No words of gratitude, no farewell ritual, and just like that, they parted, quietly walking in two different directions across a desert slowly waking under the morning sun. 30 days later, Darius had turned the wreckage of the Arc-12 into a makeshift repair bay. The Obrex crystals, the dense energy he had risked his life to retrieve from the crystal forest, were reduced to a few sizable fragments, just enough to forge an ignition core for the hyperspace engine. He worked day and night, using every scrap of alloy, every surviving cable, his back bent under the dry heat so intense, even his breath felt like sand. 1 month, neither fast nor slow. On a dusk glowing like molten steel, the ship's reactor finally trembled, producing its first pulse of sound since the crash. A heartbeat reborn. Standing beside the hull, Darius felt sweat roll down his spine as he watched the system come alive. He brushed the red dust from the panel and pressed the ignition symbol. When the inner lights flickered awake in sequence, he exhaled, stunned by the fact that he had actually carved a path out of hell. But before he stepped up the ladder, something in the air made his skin tighten. A familiar silence, a hollow stillness, as if the sky itself were holding its breath. He turned, slowly. At the edge of the rocky clearing, among thin columns of smoke rising from the test equipment, a massive silhouette stood motionless. Not by accident, not by coincidence. The figure stood only a few dozen paces away, close enough to watch him clearly, far enough not to intrude on the ship's territory. The sunset slid across the edges of an optical cloak, revealing flickers of metallic outlines before swallowing them again. Darius couldn't see the mask clearly, but he knew, by the steady stance and the absolute silence, that it was Vra'kor. He did not step into the ship's perimeter as though acknowledging this was the prey's domain. He didn't threaten, didn't raise a weapon, didn't growl, didn't send any challenge. Instead, he simply stood there, patient and unmoving like a living monolith, quietly observing his final preparations. Not to kill him, not to stop him from leaving the planet, but as if confirming that Darius truly survived and had found his own way out. A strange, unspoken respect. The wind whistled through the rocks, humming like the planet's slow breath. In that crimson haze, Darius placed a hand on the ship's hull and turned back for one last look. He didn't know why, but he nodded. A slow, deliberate nod. Far away, Vra'kor answered with a subtle motion, not a bow, not quite a tilt, but the distinct hunter's gesture, the Yocha sign for a bond acknowledged. Not allies, not friends, but no longer enemies. Darius said nothing. He climbed into the cockpit and sealed the hatch. The metallic snap cut the final thread tying him to this ashen world. The engines roared, the ground trembled, and the ship lifted off Zertal, soaring into a sky streaked with red dust. Below, Vra'kor remained where he stood, watching the blue glow fade into the clouds. And when the ship vanished completely, he turned away, picking up the last trophy hanging from his belt, a glowing shard of Obrex crystal, before heading back toward his own vessel. The strange companionship between two strangers ended there. Yet in the silence of the universe, there would always remain a thin, invisible thread connecting two wanderers who had survived the darkest night of Zertal together. A bond without name, without obligation, but strong enough that they would remember each other, even if the universe was far too wide for a second meeting.